Let's talk about the economics of war. Hi, I'm John McNeil, and this is the Invest Strong Network. Welcome. So since February 24 of 2022, Russia, the Russian Federation, has been in this really cataclysmic conflict with Ukraine. Now, both of these countries were once a part of the old Soviet Union. The Soviet Union comes apart, and the Russian Federation President, Vladimir Putin, has been on some kind of mission to kind of reconstitute the Soviet Union in some shape or form. Now, this particular war has had devastating consequences. Now, obviously, the persons who are hurt the most have been those in and around Ukraine. Huge refugee crisis, tens of thousands dead, tragically, unnecessarily, in my opinion, and an economy in Ukraine that will take years, perhaps even decades to recover. And in fact, the Russians have made it a particular mission to target the economic mechanisms of Ukraine, to cripple them not only during this period of military conquest or military adventure, but also in the post-war period. Their goal really is to weaken Ukraine for as far as the eye can see. Now, for persons watching this vid, most of my viewers are in the United States of America and Canada, North America, some in Europe, some in Asia. That's great. And what I'm trying to get Americans to see is the economics of this particular conflict is really not what you might think. Now, we have noticed here in the United States, as has around the world, a massive spike in inflation. And here in the U.S., that's caused by a number of things, right? So we had the post-CV-19 pandemic economic spurt. And we had the situation where the federal government was printing money until smoke was emanating from the printing presses. You had the Federal Reserve doing all this quantitative easing, basically adding to the money supply. Both of those things tremendously inflationary. We also had this massive winter storm in 2021, February, that basically wiped out all of the food stocks, the perishable food stocks in the state of Texas, which caused a massive demand once the storm had ended, put a lot of pressure, upward pressure on the on food prices nationally because of that. And then, of course, you had the war in Ukraine. Ukraine, a huge producer of wheat and other grains. Russia, one of the world's major producers and exporters of oil, natural gas, coal. All of those prices exploded in the spring of 2022. And basically anything that relied on the underlying transportation that would be created by oil, right? Or anyone who had to heat their homes in Europe and the Middle East, they had to pay just outrageous prices for natural gas and coal and things like that. And it just caused a huge amount of inflation that will eventually plunge Europe into recession if it has not already. But here in the U.S., interestingly, we're actually not doing too bad. Let me tell you why. So, yes, we felt the sting of inflation, but the high fuel prices have come down and come down dramatically since the summer. Not only that, but the Biden administration have put in this instrument along with the allies to actually place a price cap on how much is paid for Russian oil. That will allow both Europe and the nearby countries, other nearby countries, to get oil a lot cheaper, which will help keep their economy a bit buoyant, which is much which is much in our favor because Europe is a major trading partner. If we can keep them out of recession, keep them growing, that's great for us. So that's the first thing the Biden administration is doing. But also there is kind of a hidden hand here that is really going to make this conflict in Ukraine, I hesitate to use the word boon, but I will say it will give those of us in the United States of America a leg up. And it's this. Just like President Eisenhower said back in 1961, we have a military industrial complex in the United States of America. In fact, we have some entire cities and towns that are basically based on the defense budget of the U.S. Now, we already spend between 700 and $750 billion annually on our overall defense budget, right? And there have been many persons in Congress, Democrats mostly, that have been demanding that the defense budget be slashed, right? However, since the war in Ukraine began in earnest in February, those voices have really hushed, right? And not since the September 11th attacks have both Democrats and Republicans been so far on board on massive defense spending. And this has given the Biden administration a perfect way of stimulating the economy here in the U.S. as the global economy slides into recession, right? So basically, the Biden administration has a free hand to just pump money into arms production and manufacturing and distribution, pour just until smoke emanates out of these defense factories, just produce everything in abundance. And that stimulus will trickle down into transportation. It'll trickle down into the labor markets. It'll trickle down into the cities and the states that are major parts of the geographical parts of the defense industry. And all of that will be an enormous stimulus to the American economy. Whereas Europe, for instance, and China, for instance, they could not manage that at all. Now, sure, they could deficit spend on defense and pour material into Ukraine if they want to, but they already have mammoth budget deficits, kind of like we have. But we are fortunate, and when I say we, I mean the United States of America, we are fortunate to have a tremendously strong currency and also massive global demand for our bonds. So the Biden administration could basically spend as much as it wants to on the defense industry, really for the next year or two. And that will keep the American economy buoyant, kind of like it did during the Second World War, right? And Vietnam, the Vietnam War, keep the U.S. economy buoyant, but at the same time, not have to read the horrifying headlines of American casualties on the battlefield, right? And I believe in the Biden administration, they've been real big spenders. So there's basically nothing that will restrict them from spending as much as they want to in the DOD for the next year or two, and just employing as many people as possible and keeping us buoyant and having all that stuff go into Ukraine. And it's just cool with us. We basically get a chance to kill two birds with one stone. We help out Ukraine in this existential battle for survival against the bullying Russian Federation. And we keep our own economy growing at the same time. How sweet it is. All right. So those are my thoughts on the American war, right? Economics of war, and how this period of time is so unique and so interesting in how the United States of America is best situated than any other country in the world to handle this crisis. All right, so those are my thoughts. If you found them interesting and intriguing, please hit that thumbs up button. I'd really appreciate it. And of course, leave a comment. I'd like to know what you think about the economics of war and defense spending. I'd love to know. And of course, subscribe. Please subscribe to Invest Strong. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, friends, and good blessings.